Hello and welcome back to Sociology 101. We're going to be talking about cage-staggers. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a cage-stager? Well, I've already been getting comments from those of you on the side chat. And so if I look at some of those comments, matter of fact, Samuel Carter already gave us kind of a good working definition here. A cage stage is you're so abrasive with your opponent right off the bat from your recent disillusionment that damage control demands you isolate in a cage. And yes, I know that Calvinism is more known to be the cage stager because it's known as cage stage Calvinism. And that's kind of where the term originated. And matter of fact, I put this tweet out not long ago, which said this. Well, this is actually last year. This is a tweet quite a while ago, actually, March of last year. Often it's Calvinism accused of being marked by cage stage convert others at all cost. But it exists everywhere. Cage stagers in any discipline are marked by a greater love for the practice than the person. Avoiding this stage only comes by means of patience and prayer. And so the typical cage stager tends to be more about the practice of converting people into their newfound belief than it is about a care for the person themselves. And we all, including yours truly, fall into this at times in our lives. If matter of fact, if you don't think you've ever been in a cage stage for one of these two perspectives in one way or another, you're probably not very self-aware, because this is just a tendency all of us can fall into. And so this is not me preaching at you, telling you what you should and shouldn't do. This is me talking to a mirror. I'm literally looking at myself right here on the screen. And talking to my fellow brothers and sisters and saying, here's tendencies that we as believers fall into when we're contending for our faith, when we're contending for doctrinal fidelity in a particular group or something of that nature. It's gonna happen to all of us at one stage or another, and to one degree or another. There's some of the stages that I see people in on social media, and I praise God. I was never quite that vitriolic. Praise God for that, because some of these folks, it's like Piper when he was confronting Calvinists in this cage stage. He even says some people can adopt a worldview and not even be Christians. He says, and he seemed to doubt that some of them were Christians based upon the way they were acting. The fruits of the Spirit weren't really there. And sometimes I feel the same way when I see some people defending a whosoever will, a traditional, provisionistic, Arminian, whatever you want to call it, side of soteriology. Sometimes I see such vitriol and such anger that I wonder too if that person has truly come to faith. I'm not. By the way, I don't have anyone in particular in mind. There were some people on the side chat making jokes about, okay, what did I say this week that's going to get me in trouble on today's program? Don't worry. I am not going to be using any of you as examples, even though I could, I'm sure, if I went digging. I'm not going to be doing that. But before we jump into this and kind of look through a social media tweet that was put out by Brandon Smith, who I think is maybe lean Calvinistically. Based upon his first tweet, I think he might be even a Calvinist saying this. I'm not sure. It doesn't really matter if it is or it isn't, but we're going to look at his, I think, very wise social media post about this tendency and kind of walk through it. Before we do that, I want to remind you what's scrolling there on the bottom of the screen to like and to share these videos, to subscribe if you haven't, click the bell, become a patron, a regular giver, or make a one-time donation. The links are in the show notes. We could not do this without you. As I remind you often, we are a listener-supported ministry, and so we appreciate so much those who support this ministry. And a special shout out to Ridgemax. I saw Art commenting in the side chat just earlier, and so I know Art may be watching. He's the founder of Ridgemax, or at least the leader of it now. I'm not sure if he founded it or not, but he's the guy who donated his time and efforts to create the app for us for Soteriology 101. And their link is in the show notes as well. And if you download the app, you can listen to all these broadcasts as they come out, whenever they come out through that app. And they also do other development software stuff, software development. So if you're looking for that, I really encourage you to use them because they support us. I want us to support them. And so ridgemax.co, not .com, but you just leave off the M, .co, ridgemax.co. Again, link is in the show notes. And appreciate you supporting those guys. And so we're going to kind of go through this and kind of talk through how it is that we can all fall into cage stager kind of mentality. And again, just in case you don't know what a cage stage is, like I said, it really originated with Calvinism, because Calvinists, and I kind of went through this when I became a Calvinist, you become disillusioned to where you were, and you kind of start wondering, why didn't more people teach me these doctrines of predestination and election? Why was I left in the dark? And so you become a very avid, sometimes vitriolic in your demeanor towards other people, trying to get them to adopt your newfound worldview. And so this is one from Theopedia, which is kind of a source that has these different comments on it. What is cage-stage Calvinism? Cage-stage Calvinism is a humorous term used to warn Christian believers recently converted to Calvinistic theology. It suggests that the new Calvinist would be best placed in a cage rather than cause undue offense due to their zealous promotion of Calvinistic theology. And it goes on to give some more examples. There's also from Chalice, the 7 signs that you're still in cage stage, still a cage stage Calvinist, and it goes through some things. And of course, this is from a Calvinist, warning people of becoming a cage stage Calvinist. And how do you diagnose this? And it just goes through several points that you could read through. You become obsessed with Calvinism, always looking for it, always promoting it, always trying to bring it up. Kindness isn't really a concern of yours because you're a stalwart of truth, and I've got to defend the truth regardless. And so I don't have time for kindness. I've got to get this word out there. And so if it means running roughshod over everybody, I'm going to do it. The vigilante theologians kind of a situation, burning bridges and building walls, mismanaged identity. Winning is more important than loving. That's what I was talking about before. When you become so enthralled with the practice of converting that you forget the person, you're not really motivated by love of the individual that you're confronting. You're more motivated just to win the argument, or just to win a point, or to make the other look as bad as possible. And there's a lot of that on social media, especially because it's easy to do that on social media because you're just talking to some avatar on another side of a screen across the world. People are a lot less likely to do this when you're talking to a person in real life, and that doesn't happen near as much. Jesus gets lost in your tulip. He mentions on number 7 there, where you in other words, the main thing, forget to keep the main thing, and you so focus on the tulip or the theology or the soteriology that you really lose sight of the more important matters. And he goes on to talk about some other things, which again, good sources about Calvinism with regard to this issue. But I don't want to. We have other broadcasts where we've talked about cage-stage Calvinism before, and they are trying to police their own in some ways. At least some Calvinists are trying to police their own. I know Piper has called out this. I know. I've heard MacArthur and Sproul and all the big name guys call out the hyper tendencies of some Calvinists, and sometimes even the cage stagers of Calvinism. But I don't want to talk about them right now so much as I want to talk about us. I want to talk about those who can be converted out of Calvinism and into Provisionism, or into a way of thinking differently about these things than they once did. I've seen some of this begin to happen since the popularity of this particular broadcast has grown. I've seen more and more people become more and more defenders of provisionistic theology. And let me just say this before we jump into Brandon's post there. I appreciate the fact that there are people who are passionate, consistent, and persistent with defending the truths that God loves everybody and wants to save every single man, woman, boy, and girl. And so don't hear what I'm not saying. I don't think it falls within the cage stager just because you're passionate about what you believe. I don't think it falls within the cage stage if you're persistent in what you believe. It's how you conduct yourself. It's the motivation for doing what you're doing. So if you're passionate and you're consistent and you're persistent, but you're conducting yourself in such a way that would honor Christ and honor your family and your own honor in such a way that you'd be proud of looking back on it. And like I said, there have been several times I've deleted posts that I've made or videos that I've made where I wasn't proud of the way I acted or responded. because I acted more out of the flesh or with the purpose of one-upsmanship or not with the right motivation. So this is not about persistence. Some people accuse me of being kind of a cage stager because I created Sociology 101 and quote unquote, this is all you talk about. And I understand that perception, especially with the popularity of Sociology 101. There's a lot of content being produced. Caleb is recreating shorts all the time from the past content that we have. I'm recording at least one video a week, sometimes more, depending on my time schedule. And so to some people from the outside looking in, it looks like this is just all Leighton ever talks about. The truth of the matter is, the only time I really talk about sociology or Calvinism in particular is when I'm sitting in this chair in front of most of you. Very rarely am I talking about it in my quote-unquote real life, unless I'm invited to a place to actually discuss this doctrine. This topic in my real world just doesn't come up all that often. When I'm working for Texas Baptist in evangelism, when I'm teaching with Trinity, when I'm doing my role as a father and a husband, guess what? The topic of Calvinism just doesn't come up all that often. But I have a unique place in this whole situation because my undergraduate degree is in biblical theology. My master's degree is in applied theology. And my doctorate was in theology, and I wrote on the doctrine of soteriology. And so it's almost like accusing a podiatrist of talking about feet too much. I mean, Braxton Hunter, the president of the seminary where I teach, calls me a soteriologist. This has been my area and field of study. This is what I've spent a large portion of my time in academia studying. And therefore, yeah, I'm going to talk about it maybe more than the average bear. But if, the average, salesman out there is talking about his feet, 12 hours a day, there's something wrong. If a podiatrist is talking about his feet, or feet in general throughout the day, it makes sense. That's part of his livelihood. It's part of what he does. And so creating this podcast based upon the work that I did as a doctoral student at New Orleans, and creating this website separate from my other ministry websites, by the way. The reason I don't just plump them all together like some apologists do, where all of their ministry resources are all on one page, including all the mundane activities of riding bicycles and wearing bow ties. Y'all know talk about, they're all on one page. I separated it from my page. So I've got my personal page. I've got my evangelism page, which is all about evangelism and apologetics for Texas Baptist. And I got Sociology 101. So I kind of categorize my social media pages to be topical and based upon that field. I don't want to get into a theology debate when I post, and this has happened. The reason when I post a video of my son playing the piano on Facebook and it turns into a theology debate over predestination, it doesn't make me happy. I just don't like that. That's for their grandparents and their aunts and uncles and the people who actually know me. It's not for us to debate theology over. And so if you ever found yourself unfriended or blocked on my personal social media pages, don't take it personally. It's just that I don't want to debate theology with you people. It's not what I want to do with my entire life, okay? And so these things are things, believe it or not, I just don't talk about all that often unless I am actually addressing a particular topic like I am right now with you this afternoon. And so keeping that in mind is important, that you keep the main thing is that just this last weekend, I spent an entire weekend training people on how to share their faith, personal evangelism tools. That I've been writing articles on personal evangelism and the need for apologetics in ministry, and creating kind of a platform for some of the materials to be done. Planning a statewide evangelism conference that we just got done with in January, and now replanning the next one where we're hoping to get Stephen Curtis Chapman to come and to share and to sing and to speak, which it looks like it's going to happen. So cool thing there. If you want to go to San Antonio on January 22nd of 2024, I will be there, probably with Stephen Curtis Chapman. So come and join us. More information to come. And so we can see soteriology geek out over lunch maybe, or something like that. I don't know. We haven't talked about it. But this is what I do with my normal everyday life. And so I understand how people can get the impression that somebody who's obsessed with a particular topic, they talk about it all the time because they have created a page to handle those things. But Calvinists have been doing this for years. I mean, the Founders Ministry website says it's created. Its sole purpose is to get the Southern Baptist Convention to move back to Calvinism, because the original founders were more Calvinistic back in the 1800s when Calvinism was more popular among Southern Baptist folks. Now, obviously, the largest denomination in the world, called Southern Baptist, became that under more of in the 1940s and 50s, under more of a whosoever will provisionist type of theology, not under Calvinism. But nevertheless, the founders want to go back to their original founding and want to restore, unapologetically, want to restore SBC to Calvinism. Now, provisionists, at least myself and other traditionalists, haven't been advocating for that. I think of Eric Hankins in the preamble of his statement of faith that he wrote, kind of getting all the pastors to sign on. He's actually saying, I'm not trying to get rid of the Calvinists. I'm not trying to, quote unquote, make the Southern Baptists all provisionists or traditionalists. He comes out and says that. He says, I think we need to create a place where we can coexist, even though we disagree over these issues. And yet we're seen or being accused by some people as the ones who are trying to split or cause division. And our side's the one who's saying we just don't want the founders to be successful in trying to make us into all Calvinists, because the SBC predominantly is not Calvinistic, and that would be detrimental to the SBC to make a dividing line over that point. And so these are kinds of things that you have to point out, because sometimes, not all Calvinists, but some Calvinists have a little bit of a double standard, and they hold you to a standard that they're not willing to hold their own to. And we can fall into that too as provisionists, where we hold people to a standard we're not willing to live by either. And so we've got to be self-aware. You got to self-reflect and say, okay, where have I maybe messed up here, or where do I go over the line sometimes, or when do I allow this to become an obsession? One of the things I've said to many times, I get emails and text messages and all kinds of social media messages all the time. By the way, if you don't hear back from me, don't take it personally. Please don't take it personally. It's just that if I replied to every message I got through Twitter, Facebook, social media in general, people who find my email addresses or find my text, and people have texted me, strangers text me. I don't know how they get my phone number, but for whatever reason, you can find my phone number if you look hard enough, I'm sure. People text me, and if I don't reply to you, it's not because I don't care about you, or I don't. It's just that would literally be a full-time job. It would take me literally all day long to reply to all the messages, and so I have to kind of block out some of that portion of my life in order to continue just to exist. And the reason I wanted to confront this today is that the more I see provisionism becoming more popular on social media and more, something that even Calvinists are recognizing as growing in popularity, which is really just another name for more of a traditional Southern Baptist, but the broader tint of provisionism that it's outside of the Baptist world, to be able to say that we believe that God has provided for every man, woman, boy, and girl, that no one perishes for a lack of atonement. Nobody ends up in hell because God didn't really want them. God didn't really send Jesus to die for them. That's a provisionist. I think the term provisionism should be broad enough to include Arminians, personally, even though there's some distinctions between maybe what I would typically teach and what a traditional Arminian might teach about certain issues. But I think that the term itself would be a larger tent term to say, if you believe God provides for all people, and that therefore anyone and everyone can be saved, then you would fall within that provisionist camp. Aaron, thank you for your super chat. And he says, geeking out with Stephen Curtis Chapman over lunch. That sounds like a great adventure. Yes, it does. Yeah, I didn't have lunch with him. I don't know if I made it sound like I did, but I did not have lunch with him. I wish I would have lunch with Stephen Curtis. I would love to. Anybody who knows him personally and can set that up, I'm there. So just let me know. I grew up listening to Stephen Curtis along with Jeff Moore in the distance, and all those guys. And I know Jeff Moore and Stephen Curtis are friends because Jeff Moore was a part of our Super Summer for one of the weeks that I was a director. And so got to talk to him and get to know him pretty well. But I've never got to know Stephen Curtis. I met him once back when I was a teenager, but never got to know him very well. But hopefully that'll change come next January. So let's look at this thread by Brandon Smith. Again, I don't know Brandon's background. I don't know his theology. Doesn't matter. He's a Christian. He's a brother. And what he says here is wise, I think. And so I saved it and thought I would share it with us today. He says, much like cage-stage Calvinism was a danger for us excitable young future pastors and theologians 15 years ago, I hope we are careful to avoid a cage-stage theological retrieval in the next generation. Here are a few signs of cage-stage theology from a former practitioner. So notice the humble approach he's taken here. He's saying, I'm a former practitioner. In other words, I used to do this. I mean, I used to fall into this. This is something that I can do as well. So he's acknowledging, he has some self-awareness that this is something that we can all fall into, including himself. And so I appreciate the tone of this. He says, number one, a disdain for our spiritual and theological forbears, heroes, and mentors. We are quick to critique or even slander those who came before us, those who taught us, because we now feel we've moved beyond them. Okay? Now, I remember, as a former Calvinist, I went through the cage stage in two different kind of movements of disillusionment from my former position. And so I remember kind of becoming somewhat disillusioned by the quote-unquote Arminian pastors. I say quote-unquote because they weren't truly Arminian, but maybe traditionalist pastors and mentors in my life because, my dad, for example. Many of you who know, have heard of See You at the Pole, for example. My dad is the one who that God used, I should say, to help start See You at the Pole, the worldwide prayer ministry. And my dad was a part of the Texas Baptist Convention for years while I was growing up through junior high and high school. And so I grew up going to Super Summer. He was the director of Super Summer, and so he's a minister and pretty well known here in the state of Texas, especially among Texas Baptists. And so he was a spiritual mentor of mine, obviously. Both he and my mother, obviously, are spiritual mentors, people I look up to. But I remember having this kind of feeling of, I'm moved beyond his more shallow approach to this theological issue. This kind of a mindset. Even my pastor, who just a awesome, kind, brotherly man in Wiley that I still just admire so much today. I looked at him as, he means well. He loves people. He's a really great fatherly, kind of grandfatherly figure in my life. But, he's just kind of shallow theologically, I thought, as a Calvinist. And I look back on that now, and after leaving Calvinism and coming back, and apologizing to him for helping to split his church, the church where I grew up, I look back on that, and I'm really ashamed of the way that I thought about him as lesser than, as a kind of moving beyond him, and I've out-matured him. If I had as much maturity as that man has in his pinky, I would be happy, because this man just far exceeds any hope that I ever have of spiritual maturity and growth. I'm talking about Al Draper is his name. Anybody that's been in Wiley, Texas, there's an elementary school named Draper Elementary after him in Wiley. Just a godly man. Derek, his oldest son, went to high school a few years ahead of me, but still a good friend. Had lunch with him not too that long ago, and still the Drapers are still just a dear, dear family to me. But I remember having that kind of a feeling at 19, 20 years old when I was coming into Calvinism, feeling that kind of disdain for that mentor of my life, because I had felt like I just kind of moved beyond them, or I just saw them as more shallow in their spiritual, training than me, now that I found this new faith. Now, the same thing can happen coming back out, because the guy who introduced me to Calvinism, I'll throw out names because I'm not talking bad about it. I would say this in front of their face, is a man named Steve Harden, who introduced me to Calvinism. If you imagine the most vitriolic and harsh Calvinist out there in the world that you've ever come across online, and imagine just the opposite of that, that would be Steve Harden. Okay, Steve Harden was the kindest, most gentle, loving mentor, right there with Al Draper. Both of these men, just as far as their spiritual maturity and their influence on my life, but both of them were on the opposite side of the fence. Calvinist, one traditional Southern Baptist. Both of them were just stalwarts of the faith, mentors in my life. And so even though I've left Calvinism now, I haven't left Steve Harden. And let me just put it that way. Steve Harden is still one of the men I look up to as a great mentor of the faith for me. And I love the man. I don't even know if he's still a Calvinist. Honestly, I haven't had a discussion with him about it. I assume that he is. There's been no announcement that I know of. He had never contacted me and said, "Hey, I've left Calvinism." He helped mentor Matt Chandler along with me and a lot of other guys there at Hardin Simmons. And so we actually debated with Matt Chandler before he became a Calvinist, convincing him to accept the L of limited atonement. And so Joshua, thank you for your super chat. It says, "Hey, Brother Leighton, just wanted to send some love and gratitude. Your ministry is a blessing." I appreciate that, Joshua. And so it goes both ways. In other words, when I left Al Draper in the sense of leaving his church and splitting over Calvinism, I remember having that feeling of, that he's just shallow, this, and this. He just hadn't quite got what I've got now because I've got this better insight into these truths that, Al Draper means well, but he just doesn't get it. And then coming out of Calvinism, thinking back to Steve Harden, I don't remember having that feeling about Steve, to be honest with you. Maybe it was just because of the humility that being wrong for so long for 10 years kind of created in me, just kind of this humility about people who disagree with me over these issues, because I understand why he believes what he believes now. And so I don't have that feeling of, I feel that I'm superior to Steve in some way in my understanding of Scripture now that I'm a provisionist and he's still, quote unquote, a Calvinist of some sort. I don't remember having that feeling about Steve when I came out of Calvinism. But those are just examples of what can happen when you leave a system that you begin to treat the forebears or the heroes of the faith, the mentors in your life, and even slander them or talk so badly about them. This can also come with, the quote-unquote heroes of the faith. This is one of the reasons that I read that Frank Viola book that talk about the surprising and shocking beliefs of Christians. And it has, yes, sections on John Calvin and Martin Luther and other Calvinists that talk about their shocking beliefs, things that we would vehemently stand against, that even Calvinists today would vehemently stand against. But there were also other articles on John Wesley and on other Arminians or non-Calvinists throughout the history that had beliefs that we just wouldn't agree with. You can even talk about Augustine. This is one of the reasons you will hear me oftentimes say, how much I love and respect John Piper, or I love and respect and appreciate the works of Augustine, for example, especially his earlier works when he was defending free will. That because I don't want to be the one that goes so far into the left field that you throw out the baby with the bathwater and you discredit anything that these Christian men and women have contributed to the church over the centuries and the years. And this is why I think we got to be careful when we're talking just in broad brushstrokes about scholars of the past or Christians of the past based upon some of their beliefs or some of their behaviors even, because, by the standard you judge, you will be judged. And I want to show the kind of grace and mercy that God has shown me for so long over the years, despite my many, many errors over the years. The second point that he makes, and I'll try to go a little bit faster through these. I will rant too long in my long-windedness here. Relatedly, we create disciples who are also cynical of their heroes and think that decades of faithful ministry are now, or always have been, worthless and have no benefit to the academy or the church. They begin to question their own pastors, parents, etc., for being too shallow. And that's what I was talking about, where if you do this, then what are you going to create? You're going to create disciples who also treat their forebears and mentors and those who have gone before us as just being shallow and not worthy to be considered. And so that's a tendency of kind of falling into this cage stage kind of process. Number 3, we narrow orthodoxy. Now, just take those words right there. We narrow orthodoxy. Both sides can do this. Okay, it's not being accusatory to Calvinists, but you see this a lot where you narrow orthodoxy, meaning that you draw your tent in so small, your circle in so small, that what happens? You narrow orthodoxy to a particular set of categories that neatly define, creating a type of fundamentalism that eschews generous orthodoxy for a select in-crowd reminiscent of a high school clique. This is one of the reasons that sometimes people refer to me as moderate or liberal, because I tend to have a little bigger tent. Texas Baptists have tended over the years to have a little bigger tent. And what we mean by bigger tent doesn't necessarily mean that those who are in it are necessarily less conservative theologically. I might hold to the exact same views as somebody in the fundamentalist crowd holds to. But I'm okay with fellowshipping in the same denomination or maybe even the same church with someone who might disagree over disputable matters. For example, if you ordain a children's pastor who happens to be female, I'm okay with calling a woman a pastor who's a children's pastor. I might not be comfortable ordaining the senior pastor as a female. I might have a different view on that. That's a big controversy right now. I'm a big tent guy. I don't think they should have thrown out Saddleback for that. That's just me. Some of you are going to disagree with that. You're going to be really angry with me right now. And you're not going to like my soteriology anymore because of it. Sorry, I'm a little bit bigger tent guy in the sense that I don't think our denomination needs to become so, focused upon the non-essentials that we make those matters that we split over, but instead leave that to the autonomy of the local church, the priesthood of every believer. That's marked us as Baptists, that you allow the churches, the individual churches, to handle the open-handed issues. Now, by all means, if a church, drops the triune nature of God or the sense of God or Christ being divine or something, much more split-worthy, then by all means, disfellowship with them or whatever, cast them out of the convention, whatever you want to do. But over issues about what is ordination? Ordination, you think about ordination, you think about that's praying for somebody feels called to ministry, full-time called to ministry. You got women, like in my church, one of the women is called pastor, but she's the children's pastor. And some people say children's director or children's minister, and that's maybe what you prefer. But the fact that they're called children's pastor and now they're going to be disfellowshipped with the SBC because they use a different vernacular, I don't know. It's just, to me, it just seems, maybe I don't know all the best arguments for it. And I'm not trying to get into that right now with all of you. To be honest, you're going to get really angry with me holding a different position. I just don't think that the SBC should be casting churches out because of that relatively small side issue. If I'm willing, for goodness sake, if I'm willing to worship in the same denomination as Al Mohler, who is a staunch 5-point Calvinist, then surely I can worship with Rick Warren, who ordains women in the ministry and as pastors in the ministry. I'm okay with worshiping with both of those, though I may disagree with how they do their polity in some ways and their some of the theological beliefs. Again, that's just me. Maybe call me a liberal if you want to, I guess. But number 4, there's a tendency toward personal brand building that makes us self-appointed saviors of orthodoxy. Well, you see a lot of this online, where it's just this doctrinal fidelity list, and their circle's so tight, and they've kind of appointed themselves as the savior of orthodoxy. What is orthodoxy? Oh, it's all the theologians that are my favorite theologians throughout history that I have handpicked to trace back my heritage to the original authors. And it's just not that cut and dry, brothers and sisters. Anybody who's studied Christian history knows that even the term orthodoxy it can be very ambiguous. To protect said brand, we start creating history in our own image, anachronistically and/or shallowly arguing the past theologians agree with all of our little pet nuances. And again, you'll see a lot of this in the debates over soteriology, where people will try to take theologians' positions throughout history and make people, Gill notoriously did this, where he quotes wildly out of context early church fathers to make them sound like Calvinists, only to be shown later that in the context of all of those men's quotes, along with everything else they wrote, they clearly were not supporting Calvinism. And the tendency is to go the other direction, where you can start quoting early church fathers as if they agree with everything we as Provisionists believe or teach. And that's just not the case. I've said that many times throughout programs, that just because Origen or Irenaeus or Ignatius or Polycarp agreed with us on the point that we're discussing with regard maybe to total depravity versus the ability to respond to the gospel, positively to the gospel, I should say, then that doesn't mean that those men held to every single point that we believe or hold to now. Of course it doesn't. And sometimes that can come across that way. Just because we're defending a particular doctrinal viewpoint doesn't mean that the person that we're referring to back in ages past agrees with every point of doctrine that we hold to. In fact, if you investigate their actual beliefs, you'll find that they may hold to some shockingly different beliefs than you do. Just like Augustine holds to shockingly different beliefs, like the baptismal regeneration of infants, for example. Very different than what modern-day Calvinists or modern-day Augustinians would hold to if they really are judging the full weight of everyone's doctrinal viewpoints on every issue. Number 5, we divide the church rather than unite the church, all under the guise of defending orthodoxy. And so, again, it's promotion of unity over doctrinal fidelity, but at the same time, where's that line? And that's oftentimes where the question is where do we draw that line to say that we allow unity to be the kind of the badge of covering up false doctrines, and that we unify and therefore we don't address false teachings. And unity is falsely described as not confronting diversity or diverse beliefs, I should say. So unity does not need to be at the expense of good, sound theological discussions over the disagreements. And I've talked about this before quite regularly, like in a marriage. I've talked about my wife being a marriage counselor and how some of the most unhealthy marriages are the marriages that oftentimes focus so much on one spouse or the other trying to be unified. In other words, I don't want to divide, I don't want to divorce, I don't want to separate, therefore I ignore the elephant in the room. I ignore the problems I have with my spouse. I don't confront them. And so for the sake of unity, I just stay quiet. And silence is interpreted as unity. And that's just unhealthy. That is a disaster waiting to happen. Because what's going to happen in that marriage? Eventually, it's going to fester and there's going to be an explosion and a certain divorce. Versus learning how to have a mature discussion over your points of disagreement, which I've tried to, not always successfully, but I've tried to model in this broadcast to say, Calvinist, we love you, but we don't like what you're teaching with regard to soteriology. We think what you're teaching is not a biblical soteriology. We think what you're saying about people being born by God's decree, unable to respond positively to his appeals to be reconciled, is wrong. We actually do think that God created us in his image. As image bearers, we're able to respond either positively or negatively to his appeals through the gospel, and therefore we're held responsible for that. And therefore anyone can be saved, and anyone who perishes, as Paul said, because they refuse to love the truth so as to be saved. We disagree with you over that, and we still love and respect you as our brothers and sisters in Christ. That's what I've tried to model here. I've not always been successful in doing it, I admit. But we're trying to model how you can be in unity with each other while still in maturity showing disagreement, saying, I do not believe that's true. I do not believe what you're teaching is biblical. I believe it is false. Yes, it's a false teaching. And you can say it's a false teaching, but you can have somebody who is a brother in Christ, who loves the Lord, who is striving to follow Christ, as I was for 10 years when I was a Calvinist, but who is teaching a false doctrine. Some people equate, if you're a false teacher, in other words, if you're teaching a false doctrine, a Christian who's teaching a false doctrine is different than a heretic, unbeliever, who is a wolf in sheep's clothing, who's trying to deceive the church, who doesn't really believe in Christ, or is just doing things for profit or for gain and trying to deceive the masses. There's a big difference between those two. And some of you, even in the side chat right now, you don't recognize the difference. And I think that that's an error. I don't like it. I think you're in the cage stage. And I don't like it on my program because it ruins what I'm attempting to do and the effectiveness that I have. I can't tell you how many times I've had people accuse me of believing X, Y, Z, and I'm thinking, what in the world are you talking about? I've never said that a day in my life. I've never believed that. Well, I was talking to a guy who called himself a provisionist yesterday online, and he said, well, excuse me, but again, double standards. What Calvinist would ever want to be held accountable for every single internet Calvinist out there spewing whatever beliefs he holds to? I am not accountable for everybody who calls themselves a provisionist or a traditional Southern Baptist or anything of that sort. That's just absurd. And so that is another kind of sign of the cage stage, is sometimes when you treat everybody in the camp of your opponent with a broad brush of saying, because I experienced a Calvinist who was mean and vitriolic, therefore all Calvinists must be mean and vitriolic. It's just not true. There's a lot of very loving, very kind Calvinistic brothers and sisters out there. And if you've only experienced the online version of the vitriolic Calvinist, then you need to maybe get offline and maybe stop engaging with them, because it can create that cage stage mentality where you treat them all the same when they're not all necessarily the same. Derek, thank you for your super chat. Says, love you, brother. You're a good example and have helped me to think, am I acting in a way that I would dislike if I came across from somebody else it's the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Think about it from their perspective. If somebody was confronting a long-held belief that you held to, that you loved, but that you were wrong about and you didn't know it yet, how would you want to be treated? How would you want somebody to confront you in your error? And that helps, I think, when you're making those kinds of judgments. And looking back over my life as a Calvinist, I remember the folks who from the other side treated me respectfully. I remember conversations I've had with Arminians or with Provisionists at the time. Weren't called Provisionists, but traditional Southern Baptists at the time, whosoever will guys. I remember some of these guys who were just as kind as they could be, loving towards me. They disagreed with me, but treated me still with respect. And I still have a good relationship with those people. The people that I lost respect for, lost relationship with, were the people who cast me out, who wouldn't have anything to do with me, wouldn't give me the time of day, called me heretic, believed I wasn't a Christian anymore because I believed in the more of a tulip systematic. Those are the people I've lost relationship with because they didn't care about me. They cared about winning their arguments. And that's what I'm saying. We've got to be careful not to fall into that. Brandon posts some other good things here. He says, we have a long way to go. Sin is always creeping, but be aware of the us versus them. And this I wanted to highlight the us versus them theologians. And it may have come across, because we have Sociology 101 here, that it's us versus them. But I hope you have seen in my relationships with Chris Date and other Calvinists that we've had on the program, my continued relationship with men like Steve Harden or Matt Chandler and other guys that I still love dearly in my real life, real world. One of my best friends named Jason, he leans Calvinistically, and Ronnie, his cousin, leans Calvinistically, and many others I could name that I don't know if they want to be outed. Some people are Calvinist in non-Calvinistic churches, if you know what I mean, don't want to be outed, and they know who they are. They may be watching. But this us versus them mentality, I think of even family members who are in the Calvinistic camp that I have. I just don't want them to ever see what I'm doing in my work here as us versus them mentality, but more because I love you enough, I'm willing to say, I really don't think you're understanding God's word rightly on this point. And they may think the same thing about me. But at least I know they're doing it because they love me. So they're saying, Leighton, I love you enough to say, I think you've misinterpreted this passage. And I hope they're hearing the same heart that I have here. Not that you're just trying to be fake, because you can get that fake humility and the fake, and it sounds sappy and all those kinds of things. And sometimes people make fun of that kind of thing. But I think the person that you're confronting needs to know, one, you understand before you say I disagree. You need to be able to say I understand. And then secondly, that the reason I'm confronting what you're saying here is because I really do care about you as an individual. And that really goes a long way to help correct things. And so beware of the us versus them theologians who frame all discourse around their role in saving you from an enemy, whether a person or a generic them. I think that's a good word of encouragement there. He says this, he says, thinking back to number 1 and 2 above, I saw someone say on Twitter once, I can't remember who, I disagree with X theologian now, but I'm only able to disagree because he made me love theology in the first place. Like, for example, and I think that might have been A.W. Tozer. I don't remember, but it seems like I saw maybe someone like John Piper, or someone like that saying that about A.W. Tozer. Like I could hear John Piper say something like, I disagreed with A.W. Tozer, or I disagreed with C.S. Lewis. I disagree with them now, but I'm only able to disagree with them because they made me love theology in the first place. And so this is the kind of mentality, that I can say that about R.C. Sproul, to be honest with you, because I grew up listening to Sproul's Ligonier ministry. I used to get the little cassette tapes. And for those of you under, whatever it is, 25 now, 30, may not know what those are, and that you have to have, a pencil in order, my pencil to fix the little cassette tape whenever the little string starts coming out. But I had this, I remember even finding those in the garage, just this whole box of Ligonier tapes. And my wife was like, can we get rid of these now? And I was like, I still did. Well, I wanted to hang on to them. I was like, am I really going to ever go find a cassette tape player and play those things ever again? And so I think we ended up getting rid of them finally. But I cut my teeth on R.C. Sproul's teachings, and I could say the same thing. I disagree with R.C. Sproul, but he helped make me love theology, and that's just true. Same thing with Steve Harden that I mentioned earlier. I mean, I disagree with Steve Harden now, but guess what? He helped get me involved in theology and really deep understanding of who God is and His glory. And taught me how to live the Christian life in such a way that you can disagree with people but still love them, which Steve did all the time in his walk, still does. And Steve has friends on both sides of the aisle who probably never even know where he stands on the issue because he just loves people so much. I want to be that kind of Christian. I don't know about you. And so he says it seems like the right way to honor those who have come before us. And he says, as Paul said to a divided and quarreling church, that's a good reminder there, is that if you think it's only today, you're not very familiar with the New Testament. There was divisions and quarreling among the church in the first century. A lot of division. Matter of fact, divisions that make ours seem small if you really study the divisions in Thessalonica and other churches there. He says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. That's just a great word of encouragement for all of us to remember, is that love endures. And if you're going to be a provisionist whose theme is the love of God for everyone, the patience of God, 2 Peter 3:9 is one of our major proof texts. God is patient with you, right? If that's going to be your theme theology that you're going to want to defend, then you better do it with love, right? Doesn't make sense to be impatient while defending a God who's patient. Doesn't make much sense to be unloving while defending a God who loves everyone. Just doesn't make much sense. Historically, same kind of thing. It's the reason you have the Balthasar Hubmeyers of the Reformation who stood for peace and even religious liberties, and saying we don't need to convince the heretic with sword and fire, but with patience and prayer. Why? Because God's patient with us. And he even makes the argument, if Christ came for all men and he died to pay the price for all men, and he's calling all men to salvation, then wouldn't we want to give them the most time possible here on this earth to change their mind? In other words, to persuade them. And so his argument was, don't kill them prematurely, give them more time. So his theology drove his methodology. Instead of killing the heretic, killing the reprobate, killing the person who disagrees with me because they disagree with me, and ridding the world of these sinful, horrible, bad people, No, be patient with them. Pray for them. Show them love and patience, because that's what Christ did for us. And we want to give them as much time as possible to convert, to change. And so your theology is going to drive your methodology. And that's why it's so important for us to show kindness and love, not only just in our debates with Calvinists, but in our discussions with the atheists, the agnostics of the world, the people who are still seeking and still haven't found a relationship with Jesus Christ. That's why the Bible, I think, speaks so much about us showing kindness and patience towards them, so that they may know the truth and come to repentance. And that's an important part of what it means to be a true Christian. Well, getting close to our hour mark, and I don't want this one to be too long because I want people to actually watch it. And sometimes the click numbers are lower when the video is longer for whatever reason. So I want to try to keep this one under the hour mark if possible, and just remind you, as always, and as we say at the top of our page, we put Proverbs up there on the top of our page, saying that it's that persuasiveness comes with the sweetness of speech. In other words, the sweetness of speech is more persuasive. I don't know about you, but I want to be persuasive. And so that doesn't mean I have to be the tone police and say everything with just a nice, bless his heart kind of, fake Southern accent or something of that nature. It's not what I'm talking about. But what I'm talking about is when you show a level of respect for somebody, when you show them love, then you have a much more likelihood of being able to persuade them into your way of thinking, to help them understand your way of thinking. So with that in mind, go now, share Christ, and show love. God bless.